Hmm. You know what? Stuff it. Let's do it. Guild Wars 2's Power Vindicator, an absolute monstrous DPS class, benching just under 40k currently. This DPS class not only does a ton of single target damage, but AoE wise is probably one of the most competitive classes you can find. Not only is the Power Vindicator an incredible DPSer, it brings a lot of movement and utility in a lot of fights. Let's have a look at why this class is just so damn good. And for the positives. The Power Vindicator brings an extreme amount of damage, not just single target but AoE wise, probably competitive with most Reapers even. Another pro is that the Vindicator's power damage. This is generally preferred for most fractals as you generally want to phase fight before you even get to see mechanics. There are one or two odd occasions where condition is preferred, but in general for most raids and fractals, power is definitely the way to go, and that's a huge pro for it. Another pro is that the Power Vindicator has a very simple rotation to learn. Compared to other DPS classes around the same benchmark, Power Vindicator is probably one of those classes you'll be able to hit benchmark a lot easier. You can even make the rotation simpler if you ignore your sword part of your rotation and just camp greatsword. We'll have a look at that as we get through the rotation concept. And now for the negatives. Unfortunately, two of your abilities in your greatsword part of your rotation move your positioning. This means that if you follow the boss into a one-shotting mechanic, you can easily go downstate, and obviously not great. Weakness number 2, it uses its dodges to generate power and do damage. This means that you may not have dodges available when mechanics come that you need to dodge. Luckily for us though, there are two abilities that can help us mitigate damage. But in general, this is quite a big weakness, especially for newer players who might not know which mechanics are coming up next. The third weakness is resource management. Not only do you have to keep an eye on your dodge and your vigor uptime, but also your energy bar. This can mean that you don't have certain abilities ready when you need them most. And probably the fourth and final weakness is that you are very melee dependent. This means that if a boss stands inside of a mechanic that you can't go walk inside of, you can't be doing DPS. That means that your DPS uptime might suffer on certain bosses. Now let's have a look at your gear and stats. For stats, you want everything Berserkers. If you want, you can have one dragon piece on your backpack. This will just give you a little bit of extra vitality, but if this is Berserker, it doesn't matter. The amount of precision that you'll lose for vitality is so minuscule you won't notice it. For runes, you just want scholar runes. These can be crafted or purchased out of the auction house, and they're generally meta for most power classes that cap their crit within normal stats. Definitely a good way to go. Remember to be above 90% health to get the extra damage. For weapons, you want sword for your Shira rotation, and you want greatsword for your champion's rotation. For sigils, there's two ways to go. You can either go force and air, which is generally considered better for radiant, or you could go force and impact. This will probably be better for fractals and landscape. You can either have two sets of weapons or just play with one. It doesn't make the world of difference, but it is good to be aware of it for these type of game types. It all depends on what you like to focus on and play yourself. Let's have a look at food and utilities. For food, you want any food that's got power main stat ferocity of stat. This is generally the most important for power DPS classes. You can have any ascended variety, whether it's the incoming damage or the percent lifesteal on crits. These are always good options to have with you. For your utilities, sharpening stones. Just generally also again the best for most power DPS classes. Sometimes yes, people might dip into writs for certain things, but these are plenty of power for you and will help you cap your DPS and hit bench. Now that we've had a look at the stats, let's have a look at our traits and specialization. First up, Devastation. Your first minor trait, Exposed Defenses, applying 5 stacks of vulnerability on your first strike in combat and refreshing when you use an elite skill. You tend to use the elite skill in champions quite a lot as it's such a little energy cost for so much DPS. In column 1, the best choice is Unsuspecting Strikes. This deals increased damage to foes who are above 80% health. This allows you to do some big damage at the start of a fight. Your second minor trait, Destructive Impulses. This is increasing our damage by 5% base and another 2.5% if you have an offhand weapon equipped. This is why Sword does tend to just spike a little bit more above just camping Greatsword. In column 2, there's only one way to go, Notoriety. What this does is it increases our power that we gain from might, but decreases our condition damage we gain from might. This is just amazing skill, basically meaning that when we get our 25 stacks of might, we're gaining more power than any other class on the field. Our third minor trait is a massive one, Targeted Destruction, basically increasing our damage output onto a target based on their vulnerability stacks. Vulnerability will probably be capped in most cases unless your group management is not very good. So that means that we're going to get some major damage out of this skill. And then in column 3, only one way to go, Swift Termination. When a target is below 50% health, we are dealing increased damage by another 20%. You'll notice that these are opposites, Swift Termination and Unsuspecting Strikes. We're gaining 20% increased damage when it's above 80% and when it's below 50%. So the only time where our damage tends to dip is between 80 to 50% health. And for our second specializations, we're going to Invocation. The first minor trait, Invoker's Rage. When we swap legends, we're gaining 5 seconds of Fury. In column 1, again, probably only really one way to go, Rising Tide. When our health is above 75%, we're gaining 10% extra damage. Remember, this kind of almost is similar to Rune of the Scholar, where our damage is increased by 5% when our health is above 90%. You can consider Cleansing Channel if you're on landscape or doing a meta event and there aren't healers around pulling off conditions. Sometimes this might be the play, but in terms of most encounters and raids, you'll definitely want to rather go for Rising Tide. Your second minor trait, Ferocious Aggression. All damage is increased by 10% while you have Fury, just meaning that your first minor trait and Fury in general is just so much more valuable. Now in column 2, there are 2 choices. Meta is to take Spirit Boon, gaining unique boons and sharing them with allies when swapping legends. Generally, you're going to be using Shero and champions, but every now and then you might use Jealous, and that gives you a bit of stability. Definitely a good supportive skill, but you can consider Incensed Response. Gaining might when you grant yourself Fury. This ability only affects you, but it is a way to make sure that your might is capped. If your healers aren't providing you with enough might, or perhaps you're on landscape and you prefer to have might over additional boons, this probably could be a very good option to switch to. In column 3, there's only one real choice, Rolling Mists, increasing the crit chance from Fury by 25%. This is massive because this allows us to aim for our 50% crit chance, and when we gain Fury, this allows us to get to 100% crit. And now for the elite specialization, Vindicator. The first minor trait, Tenuous Ruin. Basically, instead of having a dodge, we have a leap ability that does damage on landing. In column 1, there is only one choice again, Leviathan Strength. We basically gain increased damage by 10% when our endurance is not full. This is a massive buff and we need to be able to maintain this in all fights. Your second minor trait, Balance of Discord, gaining health as well as regeneration when swapping legends in combat. Also when swapping alliance tactics, but it's not really part of your DPS rotation. Although perhaps on landscape you do tend to switch between the two, then this can obviously be fairly good. And in column 2, only one choice again, Song of Arborum. What this allows you to do is grant vigor when you dodge as well. Vigor on you lasts longer. It also applies vigor to 5 targets around you. This is a massive skill, not only to be able to use a dodge to do some big damage, but also this allows you to have more time in your rotation 2, not have to dodge off of cooldown to keep up certain buffs that we're going to get into. Your third minor trait, Empire Divided. What this does is it gives you 240 power when you're above 50% health, and then 240 healing power when you're below 50% health. And finally in column 3, again, only one real option, Death Drop. Forerunner of Death. What this allows you to do is you gain 15% extra damage for 10 seconds after dodging. So that means that we need to, first of all, keep our endurance not full, and second of all, dodge every 10 seconds to maintain these two buffs so that we're doing absolutely massive DPS. Again, the skill turns your dodge into Death Drop, a more damage, vulnerability, although a smaller area, but still affecting 5 targets compared to the damage and the radius of the minor trait 1. Obviously, we're going to have a look at our rotation in the rotation concept, but just having a look at the trait tree, you'll notice a few things. First of all, keeping your health above 90% to try gain all those extra damage bonuses, trying to get Fury permanent, trying to keep Vigor permanent, and obviously dodging, keeping your endurance bar not full, and to dodge every 10 seconds. These are the crux based on the trait tree. We'll have a look how that affects our rotation. The Greatsword auto attack, miss swing, miss slash, and then arching miss. What this allows you to do is get some big DPS, but notice also the second and third slash do have quite decent vulnerability, and as well the third hit does have chill. What that means also is a bit of soft CC. You'll notice that it's big AoE as well. Trying to finish your auto attack rotation is paramount to hit benchmark on most classes, especially power classes. Greatsword 2, Miss Unleash. A massive hit with vulnerability and a decent radius. This is a massive skill and will be used pretty much off of cooldown. Greatsword 3, Phantom Onslaught. A rush skill with a decent amount of damage. Also, see the chill there, a bit of soft CC, 5 targets, and also it's a 900 range. This is one of the abilities I warned you about that does move you out of position, so just be aware of that when using this skill. Generally, this will also be used off of cooldown. Greatsword 4, Imperial Guard. Blocking for 2 seconds and gaining stacks every time you block an attack. What you can do is push this a second time to unleash it for a fairly decent amount of damage, but also bonus damage for each block that you've blocked. This is a decent skill, but this is a skill that we will use to actually block attacks when we can't dodge, because remember, we're using our dodge for DPS, so this is a skill you kind of want to keep in your back pocket to block some attacks. Greatsword skill 5, Eternity's Requiem. A massive hit in skill with a couple of extra AoEs that explode around it. Each one does lose damage the more targets that are hit, but also this is a combo finisher whirl, which if placed in a field, a combo field can produce some cleansers or burn-in stacks or anything, so it's always worth a chance to throw it when you do see a combo field down. Generally, the skill will also be used off of cooldown. Now for our sword. Preparation Thrust, Brutal Blade, and Rift Slash. Massive skills. Obviously, you can see the damage goes up as well. Not as much AoE as the Greatsword, but a fairly decent amount. And also notice it does provide vulnerability. This is a massive feature of playing Revenant in general, is that we do provide a lot of vulnerability, not just for your raid group, but for also fractals and landscape. Also, do take note of Rift Slash's extra effect with the Rift damage. This means that completing your auto attack chain with Sword is probably the most important one to complete. Sword 2, Chill in Isolation, a massive hidden skill. It does more damage when the target is by itself, so i.e. the skill is paramount to use off of cooldown, especially if there's just a boss near you. It also provides some chill, i.e. soft CC, and is also a combo finisher whirl. Sword 3, Unrelenting Assault. This does provide you with 1 stack of might, a slight bit of damage, but most importantly a 1.5 second evade frame. This is another skill that we will use to try avoid damage when we don't have a dodge available. Sword 4, Shackling Wave. Doing initial damage as well as post damage, this skill hits like an absolute train. Also provides 8 stacks of a vulnerability on a very short duration, as well as immobilization, which is increased in duration the more targets that are hit by this attack. This attack is massive and will probably be used off of cooldown. Sword 5, Death Strike. Using an initial attack to shadow step to a target, grant yourself some fury, but then use a second attack which does a large amount of damage. This is an amazing ability and definitely one you can use to close the gap on a lot of targets. Now let's have a look at the utilities. Remember, Renegade doesn't get to choose the utilities, it's based off of your legend. The heal skill, Selfish Spirit, hitting all targets in the area and healing yourself for each target hit, as well as applying vulnerability, not just a heal skill but also a slight bit of DPS. Nomad's Rush, lunging yourself forward, doing some massive damage and gaining might for each target hit. Notice it does have a cap of 5 targets. This is also a leap finisher, so it can get some extra play out of some of the combo fields. Scavenger's Burst, probably your only range damaging skill. You place this on an area and it basically does damage, gives burning stacks, and will boon you with quickness and fury for each target hit, as well as granting you some endurance. So this is quite a massive skill to use, not just to make sure that your quickness and fury or uptime is good, but to make sure that you're doing damage from range. Reaver's Rage, it's not only a stun break, it's also a daze as well as a damaging skill, granting yourself stability as well as extra stability on every target hit. This can be quite massive in some raid encounters like Slow Bazaar, where you might need to provide stability to the group. And the elite skill, Spear of Archimedes. This is a massive damaging skill as well as providing some torment. This skill has got quite a large range and it's not too much energy to use. This skill is definitely a big skill to be used almost off of cooldown, and especially if there is a part where you can't get close to a target to do some DPS from rage. Now let's have a look at Shiro. The heal skill, Enchanted Daggers, giving yourself 6 daggers which heal and do extra damage. This is quite a good skill to actually just place on yourself and leave, as it is a buff. So in between split phases, when you know that your endurance or energy is coming back, you can precast this just for a bit of extra damage and also healing. Probably the most important skill to be aware of in Possible Odds. Gaining 50% move speed, but also gaining extra damage a second hit every time you strike a foe with a quarter-second delay. This skill is massive. Generally, when you're in Shiro, this skill is where most of your damage is going to come from. Phase Traversal, a skill that allows you to shadow step to a target and hit them with a small attack, as well as granting you a bit of quickness. This can be a way to just kind of close the gap on certain bosses. Repose in Shadow, a shadow step backwards that breaks stuns as well as removing movement impairing effects on yourself. Grants you a little bit of fury and is also an evade frame. But just notice, this skill will make you go backwards quite a decent degree. So don't hit the skill if you are going to go off of a platform. Your elite skill, Jade Winds. This skill has a massive energy cost, so generally it's not used, but you can use this for a massive stun. This is generally also used in certain fights like your Samrogs and your Borsevals if there are split phases and you do have a little bit of time to build up to use this skill. It's also got fairly decent damage as well as vulnerability stacks. Now generally, if you do need to provide 10-man stability, you might need to switch out champions for Chalice. This allows you to bring, obviously, Inspiring Reinforcement, which is a massive stability gain. This is a massive skill and can provide 10-man stability if you move in and out of the road. Generally, in this stance, you'll also want to keep up Vengeful Hammers for some extra damage as well as minus incoming damage on yourself. Your CC skill will be Forced Engagement, i.e. throwing on chains that do decent soft CC with a taunt and a slow. Your heal skill will remove conditions as well as heal you, removing a massive 5 conditions. And your ulti skill, Right of the Great Dwarf, is a stun break as well as minus incoming damage for quite a bit for 5 targets. Generally, this is only used in special situations and might be the case where you drop your sword and bring a staff. Now, if you do need to play more supportive, i.e. bring a staff and Chalice, there are a few things you need to be aware of. Obviously, your auto attack providing some damage as well as healing, and also a combo world finisher. Your staff 2, a decent AoE heal as well as some damage and weakness. Your staff 3 is a channeled block. This can be used in a lot of cases for mind crushers or just block certain attack that would generally be a one-shotter. Your staff 4 is a massive conduit cleanse as well as a blast finisher. Remembering to use this, especially if there are fields down on the floor, for some extra gains. and also just being able to save your group from some condies. But the most important reason and the meta reason why staff is brought is for Surge of the Mists. What this allows you to do is channel yourself, knocking yourself forward, and doing 150 Defiance break bar per pulse for 8 pulses. This means that you could be hitting way over 1,000 Defiance break bar if you can hit all of those pulses inside of one target. Generally, this brought on fights like Consumables and Samrock account for most of the CC bar. Now, if you are to bring a staff, for the DPS portions, you will camp your greatsword and you will use either Shiro and Champions or Shiro and Jalis, and then only swap to your staff when you know that you're going to need to either CC or cleanse condies or block an attack. Now let's get into the tough part about the guide, the rotation concept. There's obviously a lot of resource management and skills to be aware of. So let's go through the priority list. We need to make sure that our endurance bar is not full. When using the dodge skill, we do quite a lot of damage, and also we gain Forerunner of Death. We also gain extra damage when this is not full. Remember, we have traded that Vigor is affecting us greater, which means that this bar will replenish in less than 6 seconds. This is quite important to be aware of, as when you get Forerunner of Death, obviously our Vigor will affect us and we will get that skill back even a little bit quicker. This gives us a little bit of extra play on Forerunner of Death, but not necessarily on keeping our Vigor drained. So if you are uncomfortable, dodge twice. This is not recommended generally, but this will give you more time to do DPS and less time to have to worry about using dodges in between abilities. As you get better at the rotation, you can use dodges only when you need to. Now we need to think of our skills. Basically, if we are far away from the target at the start of the fight, we want to use obviously skill 3 to get on top of that target as quickly as possible. In our greatsword, we want to use skills 2, 3, and 5 basically off of cooldown, as well as Nomad's Advance and also your spear. If we can put all 3 of these skills and these 2 utilities on cooldown, we've done a good job. So basically, you want to try keep those 3 skills on cooldown while trying to manage your dodge. So almost at the start of the fight, your mindset needs to be like, am I far away? Like, is this the boss? Skill 3 to get on top of them. Maybe use Nomad's Advanced. Then use the spear 2, 5. And then what we want to do is we want to switch weapons and legend switch. Generally, the idea is in Shiro, we want to be sword. Now, once you're in your sword with your Shiro, what you want to do is use skill 2, but apply impossible odds just before the damage component goes off. Obviously, if you can't time it, it's fine. Just use skill 2 and then apply impossible odds. But if you can time it properly, you can get it to the point where you use an impossible odds and you'll have a bit of time in your Shiro stance. What happens is once you've applied impossible odds, it will start to drain your energy down. We want to obviously use skills 4 and 5 off of cooldown and chill in isolation off of cooldown. But if you are a newer player and you are struggling, you can always turn off impossible odds for a few seconds, build up a bit of energy, and then reapply it. That's fine. Don't stress about it. As you get better, you will get to the point where you don't have to do this. But obviously, you don't want to interrupt auto attack chains, so don't try interrupting with chill in isolation unless it's the first hit of the chain. But if you are on Brutal Blade, finish the auto attack chain off first and then use it. Once you're done with your Shiro rotation, you can obviously switch legends and also weapons to go back into your champion's greatsword rotation. Remember to prioritize the attacks, and that's pretty much it. If you can manage all of that with dodging, you're going to hit benchmark. But if you are a newer player, or perhaps you're a player who's a bit poorer and you can't get the sword, you can do this rotation with just the greatsword. What you'll do is you'll obviously in your champions just use your Nomad's Advance and your spear, and then inside your Shiro rotation, you'll just apply possible odds and try and use skills 2, 3, and 5 off of cooldown. This will get you a fairly high DPS. Obviously, you won't hit benchmark, but you'll just be under it by a very small margin. And as a newer player, this might simplify the rotation enough for you that you feel comfortable. And when you get more comfortable with the rotation, start working in the sword part of the rotation. And that's it. It's as simple as that. This is an extremely good DPS class, as well as a really nice DPS class for newer players. I highly recommend trying this as one of your first DPS classes if you want to get into some big landscape, big fractals, big raiding content. This class is definitely a good one. Remember, obviously certain fractals and raids do require you to play a Condi class, so you might want to maybe look at Condi Renegade if you are interested in a big DPS Condi class and you are playing Revenant in general. But for power class, this will get you into so much content. It is ridiculous and it's very fun to play. I'm a massive Revenant enjoyer. I played Herald, I've played Renegade, and now I'm playing some Vindicator, and I'm enjoying it. Obviously, I'm not at the level I want to be at just yet on this class, but I mean, it's all about practice and fun times. I really hope this guide's helped you, and if you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and if not, I thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. For more on this build and others just like it, catch me streaming on Twitch. Stop by anytime and hang out. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and share with some friends. It will really help grow the channel.